All right, pretty excited. I'm actually impressed all of you stayed that long. We are almost the last act before the cocktails. There's going to be some prizes first, announcing the winners, I think, of some of the judging. And we'll do that outside. Great. So thank you so much. Very excited to be here. I think we have an amazing panel. A lot of the talk in Silicon Valley has been about accelerators and VCs turning into platforms. So going global and running accelerators is really the topic of the day. I think you understood that so far. At BootstrapLabs, we believe innovation has no borders. Ecosystems do, and I think those players here with me are trying to address those challenges in different ways. I think of some of them as the world comes to us and we're going to be the best in the world. Others say we're also the best in the world, but we're going to go to the world a bit more. And actually, some people find themselves being global and then wake up one morning and say, oh my God, what do we do about this? So let me quickly just across. Sitting to my left, Hale is a partner of Combinator. I don't think he needs an introduction, but I'll let them describe their firms. In a second, Tsai, partner at 500 Startups, and Jonathan Nelson is a founder at Hackers and Founders. So please introduce yourselves, a little bit about your firm and their strategy, and then we'll dig into the subject.
Again, Hale, partner at Combinator. I previously founded a company called Wufu, which was one of YC's earliest batches. And we provide seed funding to startups. We usually provide between $14,000 and $20,000, depending on the number of founders. And it's pretty straightforward. We've funded about 617 startups so far, 53 in the last batch alone. 511 of them have raised money, and that's a total of about $1.7 billion. 287 have valuations that collectively equal about $11.7 billion. And of course, most of that value comes from 10 of our most popular startups, which equal to about $8.6 billion.
Hi, I'm Tsai. I'm a partner at 500 Startups. So 500 is a seed fund that also runs an accelerator program. We actually run two programs. One that probably most of the group knows is based here in Mountain View. And then the other is our Mexico City program, which is catered much more towards the Latin American market. So we typically run, well, the accelerator has been in operations for about 3 years. We've completed 6 batches. Our 7th batch is actually, we're starting to send out offers this week. We'll start in October. We've invested in about 160 companies just through the accelerator. Overall, we've had probably over 500 companies in the portfolio. We typically invest $50K into each company. And the Mexico City program is a slightly different structure, but a lot of our companies we're a pretty global program in that we attract a lot of international founders. So, and I think that's actually been increasing. The portfolio overwide is maybe 25% international, but with the accelerator batches, at least with the last couple batches, more than half of the batch has been international.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Nelson, not Adam. Hey. I changed. I am Jonathan Nelson. I'm the founder of Hackers and Founders. We started 5 years ago as 4 dudes and me in a bar in Sunnyvale, California. And it was really just a way my wife said, Jonathan, I love you, but get out of the house and go talk with other people about startups because I'm tired of hearing about it. So I did. And in the last 5 years, that meetup has grown into the largest group of nerds building startups in Silicon Valley. We have 10,000 members. We also have 42 other chapters in 18 countries around the globe. And when that happens, you sit back and you scratch your head and you say, holy crap, what do we do with this? So we're actually building a platform to help startups from Silicon Valley and around the globe know when it's time to come to Silicon Valley, and when they do come to Silicon Valley, what kind of services do they need, connecting with accounting, legal, design, sales, capital, of course. We've referred a couple of startups over to 500 Startups. We do not provide investment. We just provide services. And the bet that we're making is that investment and advice will eventually start to split, and that platforms like AngelList and Funders Club will become a funding API, and we're trying to become a peer mentoring / services API for startups interested in accessing the US market.
Yeah, very good point, actually. I think people, of course, you need money to build companies, but you need great advice and people willing to spend that time. The most valuable thing we all have is time. So when people dedicate some time to work on your startup, you should never underestimate the value it has.
And you should introduce your Bootstrap too.
Oh, well, there's no self-promotion here. But, you know, BootstrapLabs, we're a platform that's been helping foreign-born entrepreneurs relocate to Silicon Valley without really unrooting where they're from, but taking the fact that we're born somewhere else in the world and turning it into an advantage. Very often, you know the culture, the schools, you know also the support from the government you can get in different ecosystems, and so we turn that into their advantage, allowing them to scale faster than they could do here in Silicon Valley. And sometimes you look at Europe as a low-cost country compared to the US. Everybody knows Europe is not a country, but still, it's pretty impressive. And so that's what we do. We're passionate about it. We opened an accelerator in Malaysia. We think it's a very interesting part of the world. And we are pretty present in Korea the last several months. And going forward, I think we will be because of all the things we see today. And the fact that you are all here standing proves that there's really something happening over there that the world wants to learn from. So back to the panel, I think some really good points made here already. I just want to throw a few numbers out there, and I think they're probably off because it's so hard to track at which pace the accelerator ecosystem is growing. But you're looking at about maybe 170 accelerators around the world, maybe split half and half between the US and the rest of the world. It might be more than that. Thousands of companies being accelerated, 10,000s of jobs being created, and then about 160 exits being tracked so far, I think, for about $1.7 billion. And then about $2.7 billion going into it. So still, again, an investment phase happening right now into the accelerator ecosystem. We heard of some of the valuations here that, of course, a lot of the big winners have even not exited yet. So I think the numbers and the jury's still out. But an important question to the panel, I think, to me is accelerators own equity into companies. And ultimately, you are an investor somehow, and you seek returns for your shareholders. And so how do you see this global explosion playing out for the accelerators? Because I know the statistics and I know the exits are driven out of Silicon Valley. So what do you think about that? Do you think this model is sustainable, this pace of growth is?
I mean, I think it's changing. I think a lot of investors here are maybe a little bit, like this came up in the panel earlier, that people think that there's obviously opportunity outside of the US, but not that many investors want to invest outside the US for many reasons, and it's hard. You have to really know the market, and there's a lot of questions around liquidity, and I think there are still those challenges, but it's definitely improving in terms of a lot of other more developed markets like Korea are starting to make a big push towards like entrepreneurship and companies, and some of those bigger corporations are now also looking to startups as a source of innovation. So you're starting to see, like in Japan, like Rakuten has been much more proactive in, like they put a big stake in Pinterest, they acquired Viki. I think you're going to start to see a lot more of that. Depends on the market, but I do think it's still very challenging. But in terms of like global accelerators, I guess it depends which one, but I think they certainly have served as a good kind of filter for startups in that market.
So you see more M&A happening in different markets over time as this movement of startups across the world start exploding a bit?
A couple interesting data points. Hackers and Founders Mexico has grown from nothing 18 months ago to we now have 7,000 members in Mexico. And that's just all viral, someone wanting to take a Hackers and Founders meetup. We talk for a brief and next thing you know, they have 300 to 500 members. But interesting stuff is starting to happen, like Carlos Slim, one of the richest men in the world, but he's a Mexican magnate. They just bought Shazam, which was an American company. I think right now, the latest stats that I heard was that 85% of the mergers and acquisitions that happen in the technology world happen about 30 miles from here. And a lot of that merger and acquisition activity has traditionally been known just from like, hey, Joe, you're in corp dev at BigCo, you should actually talk to this cool startup I know. They have XYZ technology. And a lot of Silicon Valley, because so much of it is face-to-face, that kind of accelerates this process of mergers and acquisitions. I suspect that as more conferences like this start to happen, and we actually start to develop greater bandwidth between these startup hubs around the globe and Silicon Valley, that more of that will happen. Because I actually believe firmly that the future is global.
Yeah, I agree. I've done a fair amount of cross-border M&A deals from Europe and the US. I can tell you, it doesn't matter how good the technology. If I don't know the people, it's not going to happen. People rather go buy Yammer for $1 billion than the $150,000 build clone company out of Czechoslovakia. But so maybe Kevin, you can touch on you guys attract people from around the world. I mean, you're the Rolls-Royce of programs out there, and the way you do things is a bit different. And I think it has a lot to do with the people, and they are here, right?
I think, I mean, Y Combinator was started on the premise that like we believe smart, creative people would do better to start a company than to do an internship at another place and get lost inside of sort of a cubicle empire. And what's interesting to us is basically that more startups, we feel like it makes the world a better place. And so our ultimate goal is just to be able to continue doing what we're doing. And so obviously, since we try to act as much like a startup as possible, which means that we want to try to achieve growth, we try to push that as far as possible in terms of seeing like how many startups that we can sort of help inspire and make happen, as much as possible. But like our formula for success is very, very simple. Focus on clarity. We have this mantra, make something people want. And all we do is remind our startups of this over and over and over again. And everything else, we just try to sort of remove distractions. So as far as like the global explosion of accelerators out there, we see this as a good thing to have people be more aware of sort of like, this is a path of opportunity, especially in Asia where a lot of people think like, used to be the goal was to become a company man. We think it's wonderful to see smart, creative people to go out there and say like, okay, we're gonna try to start something new, and a result actually create some new value from nothing.
Instead of being lawyers or doctors.
No, those people make great startups.
No, absolutely, I know. I'm joking because, as in Korea, unless you're that kind of jobs, you're not qualified to marry any Korean woman. Anyway, so you touch on something, I think, when you look at, we heard on the panels earlier, at the VC level, right, it's challenging to scale globally. Things works, others don't, and, you were touching on that. You took a class that was maybe 80 down to a bit of lower number, and maybe Christine also you can touch on that. How do you guys manage scale? Because it's a tough business when you talk about advising people and spending time with them.
Yeah, so I became a partner after that sort of infamous summer 2012 session. They asked me to become a part-time partner afterwards. Basically, it's sort of like 83 startups sort of broke the camel's back in terms of like what the small team at Y Combinator could sort of handle. And there's a lot of sort of observations that we had that we sort of learned from the process. Part of it being that like people who got money from the YC VC funds, some of the money was like too much money. So when startups had to fail or needed to fail, they didn't fail gracefully. Instead, they failed painfully and with a lot of drama. And the result was it took attention away from more successful startups. The other thing is we realized that we wanted to change some of the standards. So I only came in after this was sort of done. So I don't exactly know. But the basic phenomena was that YC tried to look for indicators that would result in a startup to fail. And so as long as they didn't have those indicators, we would take a chance on them. And so we sort of changed a little bit of standards. So we're looking both for not having indicators that would lead to them being failures, but also have some indicators for success. And the result has been the last two batches have been relatively drama-free. The less money that we've been giving them for YC VC fund helps them sort of reboot a lot faster, pivot more gracefully. And so things have worked out well. But we also have implemented a lot more things. We've added a lot more part-time partners. So these are people who are YC alumni that are currently running a startup, and they're dedicating some part of their time to advise the startup, spending a couple of hours a week. And then we've added more full-time partners. So I'm one of the new people that's been added. And then we've also added, just hired a growth person. So they're focused on sort of attracting more talent to YC also.
As in a growth hacker or growth...
Something like that. Basically, we're always looking for more smart people, and we know that some of the stuff that we do at YC is still locked behind some doors, and we know that there's a lot of things that we just haven't had time to sort of publicize them, so this person's going to help us like bring more awareness to sort of the things that we do.
Sure. Kristen, maybe a word on how you handle the scale.
So, I mean, every accelerator is has a very different model. Like some are very hands-on, and they have much smaller cohorts. YC has larger classes. They don't work from the office, but they have a bigger staff now to help advise the startups. I guess we're probably in between. Like our class sizes they're on average about 30. In terms of staff, we have about 10 folks on the investment team, but a lot of them are regionally focused. So we usually split the companies up in terms of a lot of the if it's a companies coming from Brazil, then our venture partner in Brazil kind of oversees them. These folks usually travel back and forth from their home base to Mountain View. I think how it's really scaled is the batch itself comes together and helps each other a lot, and then our community helps these companies a lot. That's probably the #1 thing that most companies want out of 500 is access to that network. And I think there's actually a very strong culture in our network in terms of how they help each other, kind of feeling very proud to be part of 500, and you know, if it's a batchmate or you know someone who was in another batch or a seed company or a mentor, everyone is very willing to help each other. In addition to our investment team, we kind of have a newer formed team, like in the last since earlier this year, called our distribution team, which a lot of people say growth. We call it distribution, but folks that kind of are there to help our companies one-on-one with metrics and customer acquisition. It's still fairly new, but I think having teams like that and you know, as many folks on staff as possible to be there to help, it's pretty key, as well as just the community. So it's something we're always learning, you know, how we can better scale, because people always ask us, you guys have 500 companies, you can't possibly know what's going on. Sure. Sometimes I actually don't know what's going on with some of them.
Talk about 10,000 members.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've actually scaled to 10,000 members in Silicon Valley with just my wife and I, and to this day, we've only had $200,000 budget.
So wait, you brought more geeks home? She told you to get out of the house.
Exactly. And so we have just kind of a hub and spokes system of volunteers around the globe, and they're all volunteer organizers. We're actually going to start to consolidate that over the next year. But in our incubator process, what we actually do is, I'm pretty much a firm believer that I'm not a guru. I actually see myself as a Sherpa, someone to actually carry burdens. And we actually work very hard to work on peer mentoring and peer support. I just have this fundamental belief that entrepreneurship is a craft that we learn from doing, and we actually learn from other entrepreneurs. And honestly, I've learned immense amounts from the entrepreneurs and the 19 companies that we've worked with so far. And honestly, they're fantastic resources. What I usually do is I see myself as a human router, saying you should talk with this person, this person, this person, and this person, because they're a lot smarter than I am. And so I tend to have like the power of peers and the power of using other people to help. Oh, please help me.
No, that's a good point. I think we heard it many times. The power of the network and alumni network is very important. Of course, you want those people to spend time, and as you scale, it gets harder, but it's an important part of it. Because we are here at beGLOBAL, and we talk about how Silicon Valley is attracting some of the best and brightest around the world, and again, half the people that have started companies here happen to be from somewhere else. Tell us a little bit about, you know, the increased amount of foreign entrepreneurs coming to the Valley. What are some of the challenges, if any, that they bring with them for you as potential mentors or as potential follow-on to the programs? You know, the difficulty to really stay in Silicon Valley. They can come and visit, quote unquote. There's a lot of tech tourism happening, not through the accelerators per se, but people need to come here and to understand what it is. But it's really hard to stay in Silicon Valley. So can you touch a little bit on that?
I think the biggest challenge is visas. Like that's by far the biggest pain for a lot of the foreign-born entrepreneurs. But aside from that, aside from stuff that they may or may not have control over, actually a lot of the entrepreneurs I think that come here from outside of the US, a lot of them, there are a lot that have already maybe been here, or they're more open to coming. So I'm thinking in terms of like, there are some like cultural differences, like in terms of how you interact with people here. I think I might have thought this like when I visited Korea, but you know, in Silicon Valley, there's a sense of like hustle, and you kind of bug people to, you know, very persistent. And in other cultures, probably in Korea and other parts of Asia, and even, you know, just outside the US, that you don't do that, or it seems very just people. Right. People don't, you know, you don't stalk. I mean, not encouraging people to stalk, but you don't kind of like hustle your way to find, you know, get in front of an investor. It's just sort of like. Well, people aren't that forward.
Jeff Clavier was the B-launch, right? And he was so happy that no one came and hustled him at the end to give business cards.
Yeah, I think there's like cultural differences, probably just, you know, you think about it, you're coming into Silicon Valley, you don't know anybody, you don't have the network. So, you know, I mean, there are those types of challenges.
I mean, people talk about visa, people talk about, you know, of course, we know the governments, there are things that we're trying to change here from Silicon Valley on that point. I hope it moves forwards, as it's called, but.
Like 20%, like just to address the visa problem, just because we're very much a community and ecosystem-facing organization, and our tagline is, how do we make life suck 34% less for founders in Silicon Valley and around the world? Part of that process is just policy-facing, so 20% of my time is spent on policy issues like immigration reform. And so that I actually see ultimately is going to be a competitive advantage for us, but also other challenges that other entrepreneurs have coming to Silicon Valley is the talent. I actually see that companies in Korea probably are going to have a huge competitive advantage maintaining part of their engineering resources in Korea. And I actually recommend our companies just bring 1 or 2, maybe 3 people over to Silicon Valley and start to create a globally distributed company, because you need the networks and the relationships that you form here for M&A, for investment, for business development, but also, you know, use your global market strategy as a strength rather than think of it as a weakness. Think, I know the Korean market, I know the Southeast Asian market, I know this market, and I'm going to learn about the American market, and think of yourself from early on as a globally facing company rather than just say, okay, now I'm a US company.
So don't make it easy for the rocket internet guys of the world, basically.
Exactly.
Great. So on that topic, do you guys track the amount of foreign, you know, entrepreneurs that come through programs that are able to stay here, or it's not even on kind of the KPIs per se?
We don't track it exactly. I mean, we obviously advise and help. A lot of times we have startups from our YC alumni network. They're usually helping each other out, mostly for that, since like that's going to be more their specialty, and a lot of them have that sort of background experience. I think we had like 17% of the startups in the last batch were either had founders or the team was based outside of the country, and they came from all over the world. And so I think while a number of them want to stay out in the US, a good number of them, about 4 of them, which are focused on sort of international issues, are going back to their respective countries and building out teams there. And so sometimes that's like a better fit for them.
But that's a good point. I mean, you know, with the accelerator we have in Malaysia, we see, to our surprise, we saw people from Europe applying to Malaysia. And they had a pretty good product, some traction. I'm like, really? Why Malaysia? I mean, you know, trust me, Paris or Vienna is a lot nicer than KL, and I love KL. And the guys told me, look, there's a few guys in Silicon Valley that have raised a bit of money, they have a bit of traction, a bit ahead of us, and they're not going to be in Southeast Asia for 3 to 5 years. And so we see an opportunity to do an arbitrage between ecosystem. And I think more and more, when you look at technology world, you're going to be able to arbitrage, you know, different ecosystem and go into different markets faster than others. And you can distribute your products very efficiently these days. So I think that's an interesting trend. And so that brings me to what is defining success for an accelerator? What is the mission of an accelerator? And part is education, part is connecting people, part is hopefully creating value and equity, value creation, not just value. And there are many ways to create value, obviously. How do you guys think about that?
Like I said, like our metrics for success are based on our roots. And so if we can continue like funding more startups and having smart creative people like control their own destinies, that'll be like delightful for us. And we've been lucky enough to have enough success, then we've been able to continue to grow it as sort of our returns sort of have worked out well for us. But there's no like deep master plan in terms of figuring out what success is. We don't obsessively track all these numbers in terms of what factors resulted in this kind of conversion. It's like, did we get a smart team? Did they end up applying to Y Combinator? Did they go through the program? And then are they happy as a result of going through YC? It's very, very simple, very sort of service-oriented model.
Yeah. I mean, I think most accelerators probably wouldn't necessarily either admit it or say that's the primary goal. But ultimately, if you look at accelerators that do invest, a very key metric is how much funding can their companies raise, and kind of like, you know, valuation, or like how well have those companies performed. So I don't think that's necessarily always the most important. I think, kind of the softer, like, are there more businesses being formed and, more entrepreneurs, that's probably ultimately like a better mission, but at least you have to measure what you can. So if you really have to come up with some kind of metric, then that's usually that's usually the most clear one.
Yeah.
But
and Jonathan, chime in, but I think you're going to say something along the lines that maybe education is an important aspect as well, I feel.
So we've kind of backed into the business model of this kind of startup services platform. I mean, literally, it was 4 dudes and me in a bar 5 years ago, and now our events are 350 people. Dude is gender neutral in Silicon Valley, by the way. And so it was, our last event was 350 dudes and me in a bar. If we're going to turn Hackers and Founders into a business, my goal personally is to move GDP. And to actually get more entrepreneurs, more capital, and to really make the life of the entrepreneur better. If I can keep the lights on and pay the rent while we keep doing it, I'm having a blast.
Right, but I think I was at a B-launch, and then Ken Wilcox, chairman of Silicon Valley Bank, said in the United States, 1.7% of GDP is basically invested by the venture industry into the economy, and 17% is being returned. So that really moves the needle. And so that's why venture industry is extremely important. And so you look at ecosystems around the world that are trying to either copy Silicon Valley or imitate or just bring the best and figure out what the magic recipe is. I think it's so hard to capture, but education, I think, plays a key role in that. The truth is, I think accelerators are bringing the best knowledge available today in how you build a technology company into those classrooms that don't exist into the programs of universities. And truthfully, I'm not even sure they're going to have the time to go back into a university program. They're going to be available online, and they're going to be disruptive. What do you think about that? I mean, I think you guys play a key role into educating a new generation of entrepreneurs, how you build a technology company, what works, what doesn't work, and bring those failures to them as well so they can hopefully not fail. You seem to say as well, Kevin, right? In what you do is about empowering people to start businesses and be adventurous, truthfully, and take control of their destiny. And then they can take a job if they want to take a job, but maybe they will have an alternative as well.
What's the question?
Well, how important is education? Do you see education, I think a lot of the value you deliver is bringing some of the best techniques and knowledge that is not really found elsewhere than in accelerators and through the people you bring to the table to them.
That's interesting. We don't tell people, like, we don't focus on like technical or how or anything like that. Like, we expect smart, resourceful people to figure out whatever ways to solve their sort of obstacles or problems. But most of the work that we have to do is kind of put like guardrails on, like, in place to just say, like, doing anything outside of sort of these parameters of what your startup should be doing, which is making your customers and making your users sort of delightful, like, anything outside of that is going to be a distraction. And a lot of times, young, smart people, because they feel like they don't know so much, they worry about things that are just inconsequential, especially at the early stages, or they feel like the things that they're making decisions on are devastating when they're really not when you see it from our perspective. So a lot of times it's like just constantly reminding people, it's like, no, that doesn't help users. No, that's not delighting people. No, you're not focusing on traction. Like, if you're not doing sort of these core things, allow them to show that their startup is succeeding rather as opposed to trying to do tricks, tactics, strategies. There has to make them look like they're impressive. Like, that's way less interesting to us, and ultimately it doesn't really work. So, like, education is like, what we teach them is something really, really simple, but what we do is we make sure that it gets burned into their brains. So therefore, when they leave, like, see, they'll know, like, make something people want, make something people want, and like stay upon that. A lot of times people start getting obsessed about fundraising, about valuations, about building large companies or brands, making themselves look important, or having huge exits. And all of those things don't focus on that core mantra. And we know anyone that focuses outside of that, making something people want, ends up failing as a result. All those other things, when they do work out well, are byproducts.
Right. So core value, really.
Core values is the biggest thing that we teach people.
Right. Great, thank you. So I'm going to try to wrap up on time because I know we ran a bit late today. Maybe one last parting question for you guys is maybe a bit more personal because I think it always makes people relate to you a bit better. Is like, what gets you up in the morning and do what you do? Because it's a tough job. You know, people think it's cool. It is cool, and you meet so many great people. But what gets you up in the morning?
I think this is an illness. I actually think that entrepreneurship is something of an addiction.
That's the nurse talking.
Before I started doing this, I was an emergency room and trauma nurse, and so I am something of an adrenaline junkie. And now I'm no longer running around an emergency room sticking needles into people's arms. Now I am running around trying to keep baby companies from dying. It's a very similar process, but I think it's a mental illness. And yeah, it's a disease, but it's a blast.
I think it's like it just ultimately just comes down to people. Like what I love is just, and this is something that I was before 500. I was at Google for a long time, and obviously I very fond memories. Built a lot of my network there, but I couldn't do what I do now there. Like I couldn't be helping companies one-on-one, and some of it maybe not literally life and death, but some of it is a matter of life and death for their companies. Like if they're they need to get connected to the right people, or they really need advice on how they're going to get customers or close this partner or whatever it is. Like it's at this stage, investors actually can help quite a bit, especially for the entrepreneurs who don't really know what they're doing all the time. And I just really love being able to, sometimes I never hear the feedback, but sometimes companies will come back and say, hey, remember when you introduced me to so-and-so at YouTube or Google? Like that worked out, now we're partnering. And I love hearing things like that. And it's not always, unicorns and rainbows. There's a lot of really hard things to see them go through. And, 500 was, when I joined, was like nothing. Like we were very much a startup too. So I know firsthand as well. There's just so many ups and downs, and a lot of it also has to do with people. But I just love helping entrepreneurs, and because it's just such a hard journey.
Yeah, sometimes we say it live to die another day, right?
I don't know. It doesn't seem like. It feels difficult while working with the startups. Like they have so much energy that it's easy to sort of like it's so nice to be able to piggyback off of it. And ultimately, like I feel like I learned so much more from the startups, just in terms of like, my previous startup, I only did one and have one very strong perspective of how that was sort of run and operated. But working with over 500 startups, it's really amazing sort of what you get access to in terms of perspectives. And while our lessons to them are very simple and straightforward, what's awesome is seeing like all these smart and energetic people that just makes it feel like the world is really, it's easy to be optimistic about the world when you're working with founders of startups. And so working anywhere else and around people who are sort of part of a cog in a wheel, when you don't have that energy, you don't have access to that optimism, it just pales in comparison. So I feel like it's really easy to do
back to Jonathan, right? It's a drug. It's actually an exhilarating drug. Well, thank you so much for this panel, and please warm applause here. And thank you to all of you for staying so late as well. So thank you.